talked a couple of weeks ago about integrating those real-world experiences. So those real-world experiences might also be part of your teaching program. Internships, undergraduate research, scholarship of teaching and learning. Again, we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Maybe teaching online and being innovative in the way you're teaching. Maybe developing new courses. Maybe it's working with student clubs outside of class time. Maybe it's textbook authoring. Maybe it's serving on a variety of department or college curriculum committees. What other ideas do you guys have that might be appropriate to fit into a teaching program? Good. So serving on graduate committees. Yep, that's excellent. That's a little bit different than graduate advising, but as graduate faculty members, you will be called on to serve on graduate committees. Good. What else? That's an excellent thing. Particularly if you are working with undergraduate students, you will be asked probably frequently to provide letters of recommendation for them related to as they're applying for jobs or applying for graduate school or applying for professional school. And depending on the nature of the students you work with and the size of your classes, that can be a pretty big part of what you do. How many do you write, or did you write when you were actively teaching?
About 40
40 or 45 recommendation letters a year. And so, I don't know how long it takes you to write a letter, but
well, to be honest, I have a format that I use.
yeah, and just kind of pull some information in.
Right, and then I tell the students to send me
Yeah.
what makes you different, like at school.
No, that's actually good. I actually do the same thing. I've got a handful of different letters that I use, and when a particular student asks me for a letter, I think to myself, okay, this student is a lot like this student. If I go back to that letter, I can at least use that as a starting point to pull that from. But yeah, that's a good point. We'll write a lot of different letters. Okay. What are the other ideas you guys have? Things that might fit into a teaching program, or some of you guys that are out online. What ideas do you guys have that might fit into a teaching program? They're being very quiet today. That's okay. Yeah. Guest lectures and seminars for sure. Conferences may or may not, depending on the nature of it, but it could. But yeah, guest lectures and seminars. Oftentimes you'll be invited to do that. Cheryl, you good? It could, depending on the nature of it, particularly if you're reviewing for education, scholarship, teaching, and learning sort of things. And so your teaching program can be a lot of different things besides just stepping into the classroom to teach. It's about a whole suite of things.
Individual studies, so they're not,
Ah.
sometimes there's a research.
That's a good point. So we've had undergraduate research up here, but oftentimes students will want to work with you on an independent study where they say, I really want to learn more about X topic and there's not a course offered. Would you supervise me in an independent study? So all these things kind of can go together. Now, will your teaching program look like mine, and will mine look like Eva's, and will Eva's look like Al's, and so forth? Now, all of ours will be a little bit different. And depending on the specific appointment of your position, that will also determine what your teaching program looks like. There are some universities that have a very strong teaching focus, primarily undergraduate teaching universities. What those faculty members do on a daily basis is different than what happens at a major research university like the University of Florida. And so all those things kind of factor in. So these are some of the things that might fit into our teaching program, but the other part of a program was that we were targeting a specific result. So next slide, Al.
Let me sideline you for a second.
Okay.
I've had the opportunity to packet, went up to full professor, how you get things done. This is balance. How do you maintain on the research?
I get asked that question quite a bit. And it goes back to that first Venn diagram that I showed you about teaching and research and service being integrated. It's about pulling all those things together. So the research that I do informs my teaching. What I do in my classes is often a topic of some of the things that I research. The service and outreach that I do is connected to that. And then probably the two biggest secrets are good graduate students like Seth, good graduate students, because they really they really bring a lot of good work ethic to it. And it's about building teams of people to where it's not you doing it all by yourself or you doing it with a graduate student. It's about bringing in a team of folks to do it. And it's oftentimes looking for opportunities in the things that you are already doing. We're going to talk about scholarship and teaching and learning a little bit later today, but oftentimes, if you're being creative and innovative in the teaching that you're doing, there are opportunities to do research on that innovation and then generate scholarship and publications and presentations and articles based on that. And so it's a way of synergizing things together. So, good question. So, what results do we want? Well, first off, you might think about results for who? Okay? You might, as you're developing your teaching program, think about what are the results that you want to have for you. What are the results that you want to have for your students? The results for your department or your degree program, the results for your college, for the university, and for your discipline as a whole. Now, will your teaching program need to address all these? Maybe not. You got to think about what's going to be most appropriate for your situation. The other part of the results you want to think about is, are you going to seek and look at short-term outcomes and other outcomes that happen immediately as you're engaged in your teaching program? Or are you thinking about outcomes in terms of what have we done that caused our students to change their behavior? Okay, that might be something you're interested in. Or you might think about longer-term outcomes in terms of how is my teaching program going to advance our discipline? Some of you might find yourself in a teaching function that is primarily working with graduate students or with postdocs. And if your teaching program can have a profound impact on graduate students and postdocs as those folks go out and take other faculty positions out at other universities, then your teaching program influenced the way they think and the way they teach, which means they're then going to influence their students. And so it's a way of having a bigger and broader impact. Okay, so different levels that we might want our outcomes to be at, and then short-term, medium-term, and long-term outcomes as well.
I think there's a tendency to get caught up in the short term more than the other. What am I doing in class tomorrow when I'm
Right. Yeah, so the short term would be what's happening today and maybe what's happening by the end of this semester. The medium term might be, okay, when the students finish a degree, of which my course was one of those courses, how are they different and what difference can they make as a result of that? The longer term might be, okay, 10 years down the road, what difference are those guys going to make because they took my class? I'm thinking about longer. But yeah, it's the short-term stuff is right in front of us, so that is easy to get caught up in thinking about those things as opposed to thinking about the longer-term pieces of that. So,
and it strikes me as I think
don't you teach a strategic marketing class?
strategic selling.
Oh, there you go.
But I think it can help, like this whole circle thing. I think it helps you in your rising department. You're thinking about these long-term strategies. All these other
Yeah, well, and particularly if we think, you know, we're in food, agriculture, and natural resources. I mean, that kind of captures the essence of what we all work in. If we think about some of the issues that are on the horizon in our respective fields, things like climate change, food security, obesity, all those sorts of things. I mean, there's some pretty daunting problems that the students that we're working with are going to be the ones that are facing those things. I mean, we're already facing them somewhat, but the students that we're working with today are going to be the ones that are facing those things head on. And so thinking a little bit longer term and helping our students see the longer term vision is a good thing. So I have a handout, and for you guys online, you have this in Sakai, and so you can pull that up if you want to look at it. But we're going to talk about for a minute a logic model. How many of you guys are familiar with the concept of a logic model? Have you guys come across that before? So a logic model is a way of thinking about a program, and I often, when I'm working on a grant proposal, I typically begin with a logic model to think about it. But a logic model is a tool. A logic model is a tool for thinking about a program as a whole. And so most people reference the University of Wisconsin Extension Service as kind of the gurus when it comes to logic models, and you've got the link up there on that to do it. But it's a way of thinking about a program in terms of what's the situation, what inputs need to go into this, what are the activities and who's going to participate, and then what are our intended short, medium, and long-term outcomes. And so obviously we think about evaluation and feedback throughout, and we can think about what assumptions and what external factors impact that. But as you're thinking about developing your teaching program, you could start, we talked earlier in the semester about backwards design, so you could start actually over here thinking about what are the outcomes that I want. Then, what are the activities and who's going to participate in those activities? And then what input do I need to do it? And so the activities might be teaching undergraduate classes. It might be academic advising. It might be undergraduate research. It might be study abroad. It might be graduate student advising. Whatever makes sense for you. Then you can think about what inputs need to go in to make those happen, and then who are the people that are going to participate. So
when faculty go for promotion right now, and you extension of expected to show a logic model in my house. Gary and I are fond of Gary and I. We want to move more towards this. How do you package? Certainly you can do that on your own. I really want. We need to do more of this. Having this.
yeah, and it again, there's all, if you go to that website, there's all sorts of resources that are there. And again, you could use this for an extension program, for a teaching program, for a research program. You can use it for lots of different ways. But it's a way of thinking through what are the outcomes and impacts that you want to make, what are the activities that you're going to do, and with whom are you going to do those, what are the inputs that are needed to make all that happen. And it's a way of kind of making it, helping you sort out the details to figure out how it all fits. And then it's also a way to help you then communicate with external people about, you know, hey, this is my teaching program, this is how it all fits together. Because it can, if you're not careful, it can either appear to be very disjointed, or it might actually be disjointed where, well, I teach this course every third year, and I teach this course every fall, and I do a study abroad every second year, and I'm on this committee, and it just looks like a bunch of very disconnected activities that are happening. Constructing a logic model would help you then think through yourself how those are connected, but then also communicate to other people. So as you're sitting down with your department chair, and your department chair says, why do you want to do that study abroad? Or what do you want to develop this new course for? You can say, well, here are the goals for my teaching program, and there's a big hole right there, and I think developing this new course would fill that hole and then meet the needs of the program. So a tool for you guys to use.
Good academic program, come in knowing what your research program looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Teaching, you often get, here are the classes we want you to teach.
Yep.
I think about what I had that problem with extension, doing all these activities, but how did I do it? Not like a program. It wasn't a program.
Yeah, and then to me, going back to that Venn diagram at the beginning of the presentation, the people that are really performing well, their teaching program and their extension program and their research program really align very nicely with each other. Now, sometimes you have the luxury of making that work. Sometimes, depending on the nature of your appointment and what you're asked to do, it's a little bit more challenging to make that work. But I'll give you a good example. Jamie Ellis. Jamie Ellis is a associate professor in entomology and nematology. Jamie is the bee guy. Jamie teaches the courses related to apiary, is that right? Bees, apiary. Teaches those courses. His research program is on issues affecting honeybees, and his extension program is on informal education, non-formal education about honeybees. Jamie's the bee guy. All his work, if you were to look at the syllabus for his course, if you were to look at his research program and look at his extension program, there are going to be significant overlaps between what he's doing. That's when you can get to make big progress because everything's connected. So again, I'd encourage you guys to think about how you can make those connections work. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Excellent question. And so, yeah, so the question was, how do you measure the outcomes and impacts? Well, and so in terms of an educational program, I don't think anybody in here other than me and Seth and Natalie are trained in conducting educational research. So that's where you can seek out collaborators and consultations with folks on your respective campuses that have that skill set related to conducting, basically we're conducting research. We're conducting research on an educational program as to what are the outcomes on, again, go back to the list, on you, on the students, on your department, on the college, whatever you've defined as your intended outcomes are. And so we're going to talk a little bit later today about the scholarship at teaching and learning. That is one mechanism that you might use. But yeah, it's really about conducting social science research, measuring the outcomes on people, because our educational programs are based on outcomes based on people. So that's a good question. Thanks for bringing that up.
So what is one goal you might have?
No, so that's an excellent thing. And so critical thinking, one of Cheryl's goals is to have critical thinking in her students. And so there are assessments available, surveys if you will, that you can assess critical thinking skills and critical thinking abilities. You could also design activities or projects in which students might be able to apply those skills and then have some sort of a rubric to then determine the extent that they did those skills. So that's just one example. Yeah, but it's, that's a different phenomena for most of you because, you're not used to measuring impacts on humans as a result, at least not psychological impacts on humans as opposed to biological impacts on humans related to the work that you do.
That's the world we live in. Certainly, we're looking for impacts in research and accreditation process.
Yep.
Those who are involved with this.
Yeah.
Well, measuring it, how do you know?
But the first step in that is figuring out what are your intended outcomes and impacts. Because if you don't know what your intended outcomes or impacts are, how do you then assess if you've worked towards those? So excellent question. Others? Okay, next slide, Al. So I've got some things that you might think about. Question one, what outcomes do you want from your teaching? Is it that you want critical thinking? Is it that you want your students to go on to professional school? Is it that you want your graduate students to take faculty positions at prestigious universities? Whatever, you get to decide those outcomes or what your intended outcomes. I would also encourage you to think about how does your teaching program connect with your research and your extension or service program? How can you connect those things together so that they are not discrete, separate activities, that they are more integrated? Beyond actual teaching of your courses, what other activities fit into your teaching program? And at this point in your careers, it's more like what activities do I want to fit into my program as opposed to which ones actually do. And as you think about, as you're applying for those jobs, if teaching is going to be a piece of what you are asking to do, then thinking about a teaching program, and as you're interviewing with a department chair, thinking about, these are the types of things I want to fit into my teaching program. What activities, if we're thinking about outcomes, one of the outcomes of your teaching program is you. What activities might you participate in to advance your own teaching? Professional associations, scholarship at teaching and learning, teachers college kinds of activities, those sorts of things. And beyond the students enrolled in your courses, who else will be part of your teaching program? Will you integrate your graduate students in your teaching program? We had Mike Kane when he talked to us about a month ago. Mike, when someone signs up to be on one of Mike's research grants, they're not just doing research, he's pulling them into his teaching program as well to pull them together. All questions to consider. So next slide. So we talked about what is a program. We talked about that a program is a set of things you will do designed to reach a certain set of results, and that a logic model is one way that you can use to help create that process. We talked about a whole host of different things that might fit into a teaching program, and I would encourage you guys to start thinking about, in a perfect world, if a department chair said, you are so awesome, we're going to let you write your own position description, what might that look like for you? And then start thinking about how you might articulate that as you're interviewing and interacting with different people. So, questions or comments about developing a teaching program?
Other than just, I was thinking about grading, as you get into being, the more you kind of know what your programs are, the better you opportunities out. So many things happen at conferences.
Yep.
You meet with people throughout the dinner project.
Yep.
When I first started, I would just go. Now when I go, I've got a reason to go.
Yep. Well, and that, Al, as you're talking too, it kind of made me think about connecting to what you guys talked about last week. As you're trying to balance things and you're making priorities about what's important and what's not important, if you define a teaching program and a research program and an outreach program, as opportunities come up, which they will very frequently, you can say, does that fit with what I really want to do or not? And if it does, you can think, all right, I'm on board, that's good. If it's like, that really doesn't fit with what I want, then you could say, thanks for the opportunity, but that's a little bit outside of what I'm trying to work on right now. So that's another good thing.
Say no to.
Yes. Yes, you can say no. It's okay to say no. Al's the associate dean. See, he said that. I'm just a professor. He's the associate dean. So he's the administrator.
I didn't say no until I got to this position, but.
Yeah, you can say no, and you know, the better you stay focused on your teaching program, on your research program, and on your extension program, the more productive you're going to be, because you're not going to be going this direction, you're going to be going this direction. All right, other questions before we move on to our next topic? We're going to do peer review of teaching. Okay. So one of the things that might fit into our teaching program is called peer review of teaching. And peer review of teaching might be something that you participate in as the person being reviewed, and it might also be something that you participate in as the person doing the reviewing. So next slide. So we're going to talk about sources of feedback for improving your teaching. We're going to talk about the benefits and reservations of observation, and we're going to talk about the 5 parts of the process, or at least a proposed 5 parts of the process. So next slide. So where can you get feedback about your teaching? Well, it could happen through observations in the classroom. So someone in there watching you teach. And so that might come from self-assessment. For most of the time, aside from our students, we're the only adult, if you will, in the room during our teaching. So we're a good source of feedback for ourselves. Feedback from our students is also helpful, and that can come formatively as they provide feedback throughout, or it can come at the end through the course evaluations that they do. And peer review of teaching is a third source of feedback. Now, when we talk about getting good feedback, the reality is it's a combination of all those things that help really give us good information. Some other things that you might consider would be focus groups with your students. We're going to talk about scholarship and teaching and learning in a little while. One thing that you might do if you've introduced an innovation in your course is to do a focus group with your students to see what did they think about what you did. You might construct a teaching portfolio, and then ultimately, going back to our teaching program, if we have defined outcomes for our students, one source of feedback is, are the students reaching those outcomes? If one of our outcomes is that students, we want them to think critically, if we do all these activities and at the end of the semester we assess them and they're not thinking critically, then that tells us that what we were trying to do wasn't actually working. So self-assessment. All right, go on to the next one. So self-assessment is, very simply, it's using your own observations to give yourself some feedback. Now that can occur a couple of different ways. One is just your own reflections as the process is happening. And so you probably recognized, I know I sure have, you're in the moment and you're up in front of a class and you're doing your thing, and on the spot you're thinking, this is not going very well. Something I'm doing is, yeah, you've been there, haven't you? I get there every now and then too, not as much as I used to, but you go like, this is, you get those looks from the students, they're back at you, and you think, okay, they are not getting what I'm trying to say. So that's one form of self-assessment. Go ahead. Uh-huh.
But if you give them a scenario with the same thing, they're just shocked out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
You just give them a scenario and just so how
Yes. Yeah. That's an excellent and a very common thing. It's about, the students are very good, and our students, by and large, are pretty good about regurgitating information to us. If we give them something memorized, they will memorize it all day long. That's what they do. But if you want for them to then apply it, they struggle with being able to do that. And so part of it is, have you created opportunities for them to apply it in class? Have you taught them how to apply it? Have you modeled for them how to apply it? Have you created opportunities for them to practice applying it and getting feedback on doing it? And so it's about kind of changing the way we do some things. One of the things that I've done in one of my classes that is working reasonably well, it's called the flipped classroom. How many of you guys have heard of the flipped classroom before? And so the flipped classroom is, well, let me back up. So a traditional model of higher ed instruction is that they come to class, we give them all the information, we send them home with a problem or a project to work on their own, they bring that back to us and we assess what they did. So if we think about it going back to Bloom's taxonomy, giving the information is a pretty low level on Bloom's taxonomy. Applying that information is a pretty high level. So in the presence of us, the expert, they're doing the low level stuff. We send them home by themselves to work on the higher level stuff. Flipping a classroom is turning that just the opposite way, where outside of class, we create, typically through some online materials, we create lectures or modules that they work through to get the information. Inside of class, with us as the expert there to assist, they work on problems and projects and activities where they can get that feedback immediately for those higher level things. And so that might be something to think about in your situation. But that's exactly the type of thing that we're thinking about when we think about self-assessment. So some questions we might want to ask ourselves.
I was just wondering, so why don't more faculty flip?
I'll ask you, yeah, that's a good question for you guys. Why don't more faculty flip the classroom? Okay, so it is a different, it's a more time and it's a different way of using time, which is always challenging, okay? Why else? Yeah, so students aren't used to being active in the classroom. They're used to sitting there listening. Okay, so student resistance. Why else? How many of you have ever experienced a flipped classroom personally? So,
Well, how many, okay, how many you've gone?
yeah. Yeah. So part of it is our own comfort level as the instructor, and part of it is, okay, I'm kind of taking a leap of faith and stepping out there, and I'm going to do something that I've not done before. I'm going to do something that may or may not work perfectly. And I've in my flipped class, I've taught it now twice in the flipped class version. First time went okay. I learned some things. Second time went better. Learned some things. I'm going to teach it again next fall. Next fall, knock on wood. It'll go better than it did the second time. So it's about tweaking and adjusting things. So, but that's a good point. So self-assessment, some things that we might ask ourselves. What did you want to accomplish today? So if you've defined what you want to happen in that class period, did you actually get where you wanted to do? What did you want the students to learn? Do you think they really learned it? What went well when I did insert whatever activity? Maybe you were going to try to do a small group activity, or maybe you're going to try some questioning techniques or something. What went well when you did that? What did the students seem to learn? What materials did the students seem not to grasp? I often use an activity to wrap up where just on a piece of paper or on an index card, what's one thing that you learned? What's one question you still have? Well, if the majority of your students have the same question, you probably didn't teach that very well. What could you have done differently? So these are some questions that you could ask yourself every day after you're done with class. One of the things I do when I'm teaching is I always have a copy of the syllabus with me, and I will make notes by different days, or I'll have a notepad, and I'll make notes about different days about what worked and what didn't work. Depending on the course you teach, maybe you teach the same course every semester, maybe it's just once a year, maybe it's once every other year. It's good to have some notes to go back to as you're preparing for the next time. So next slide. So here's a scary thought. Maybe you actually put a camera in the back and video record yourself teaching. Okay? That's kind of an eye-opening experience because you get to watch yourself the way that the students see you doing that. And so I would encourage you to do that periodically. Put a camera in the back, and then, you probably don't want to invite a lot of people over to watch, or maybe you do, and watch yourself and see yourself from the perspective of what the students are doing. Now, some campuses, UF is one of those, we will come help you do that if you want. Through the Teaching Resource Center, if you're teaching a course and you want to be recorded, we'll record you and give you a file that you can watch yourself on to see how you're doing. So it's something interesting to think about.
Our TMP has been on my mind because we just read the panels for this cycle, and it was struck by one of the faculty members who have the willingness to videotape himself. He documented, talking about documented, showed with course evaluations, critically. I was really impressed. Stamina to do that kind of stuff.
Well, and I actually, just about a month ago, I met with a full professor, 30 plus years of experience. He had gotten some pretty poor course evaluations last semester or the semester before, I can't remember which semester it was now. He's at the point in his career, if he wanted to, he could say, screw it, I'm going to do it the way I want to. If they don't like it, that's their business. But at that point in his career, he was still like, I can do better than this. And so he was meeting with me to kind of bounce some ideas off of and get some things about some things he might consider doing. Uh-huh.
Well, that's, I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
they never.
Well, and that comes down to an individual perspective. Some professors really value that feedback and take what you've given and work to improve. I'm guessing that some probably ignore them. That's the reality of it is. Now, the nature of the business is, though, that assessing good teaching is a very complicated thing to do. And so one of the easiest to interpret are student evaluations of teaching. That's not to say it's necessarily the most accurate, but it is the most easy to interpret because there's a set of means and standard deviations that come out at the end of the semester that you can look at those and interpret that very easy.
So a couple things on that.
You can actually go on to the next one because we're actually getting student evaluations and go on the next one. Go ahead, you were talking.
So I would never look at them right when I got them back. I think it's the first. I would go back and look at the data, the numbers, read the comments. So inevitably, you get this and this and this, and it just drives you crazy. But I would wait a little bit back. Part of that markers on just midterm assessment of your course. And that's a way.
And we didn't even coordinate this.
Right. So I'll let him talk
Yeah.
about. I kept thinking, it's a really useful tool.
Yeah, well, and one comment on OWLs is much like anything else is that, if you look at your distribution of your course evaluations, they will probably somewhat approximate a bell curve or a slightly skewed bell curve. And so what I typically, as I'm consulting with people, because oftentimes after course evaluations come out is when I get a phone call, it's like, I need some help. Can you come look at my course evaluations? I say, well, as much as we want to, the comments that are at the very bottom, that's probably more of a personality thing, and that's, don't totally ignore them, but don't put too much emphasis on that. Conversely, those ones at the very top, again, that's probably just somebody that really, really liked you and was going to rate you high no matter what you did. Look at those and say, hey, I did good, but then don't really pay a whole lot of attention to them. Look at those ones in the middle and say, okay, these are the majority of my students are in this range. What are some of the things that they said that I can work on and improve? Now, go ahead.
The other thing mentioned going from scanning content online, that has really impacted the way the number of.
Yeah.
I don't know. I kind of would like to get good, bad, or different. I'd rather get more of the responses.
Yep. Well, Seth and I are about to do some research to figure out what the folks that are getting high responses, what are they doing that's working for them? Because, yep. But I mean, if you've got a class of 100 students and you have 25 students complete your course evaluation, how representative are those 25 responses to all your students? We don't really know the answer to that. It might be the students that really hated what you did that responded, or it might be the students that really liked what you did that responded, or it could be representative, we just don't know. And so we're going to try to figure out, there are some faculty that are doing an excellent job of getting folks to respond, and we're going to try to figure out what are they doing that works. So some suggestions about feedback. Number one, consider formative feedback. Formative is the stuff that's happening in the process. And so you might think about somewhere in the middle of the semester, before the final ones come out at the end of the semester, and in the middle of the semester, and it could be 3 simple questions. What's going well in the course? What could the instructor do to make the course better? What could the instructor do to make the teaching better? Now, my experience has been, if you give the students an opportunity to respond anonymously, And if you are sincere about wanting their feedback to make things better, they will give you honest feedback. But the key thing then is show them that you're doing something with it. Don't ask them for feedback and then not change anything, because they're going to say they didn't really care anyway. So if you're going to ask for feedback, actually do something with the feedback and thank them for the feedback. But again, my personal experience has been, if you ask for feedback and you're honest and sincere with them, they will give you good feedback. Next slide. Good.
Did you understand any more about how to use the middle feedback? Too many faculty, I don't know how many faculty actually engage in it.
Yeah, and this is, you could do this in a lot of different ways. Another way to look is, I've heard people use a technique called stop, start, or continue, and you could ask those simple questions. What should we start doing in this course? What should we stop doing in this course? And what should we continue doing in this course? And you can do this as frequently as you want. And you could also do it in general over the whole course, or maybe you just introduced a new activity or a new assignment, and you could ask specifically about that assignment to do that as well.
I guess my comment there on that, though, is if you're able to do that in the middle of your course, you have a chance to make a difference for your parents. That's part
Correct.
of it.
Yeah.
It kind of ties to evaluation. So you get all this feedback, and you're, gosh, this semester I have to beat other classes. It'll also impact, I think, positive evaluations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an excellent point. What was your question, Cheryl? You're talking about how could individuals then get feedback on their own performance? Okay, I see where you're going. Yeah, and so if you are one instructor in a multiple section course, you probably have some limitations in how much you can change and the things that you can change. Chances are there's some common assessments that are used across the section. Chances are there's a common textbook that's used across all the sections. Chances are there are some common assignments that are used across the sections. So that does tie your hand a little bit in what you can make. Now, what you do probably have flexibility in is during the 50 minutes that I meet with my students, how do I choose to use that time? And you can probably make some adjustments there. Now, what you could do then is after the semester's over, as the team of people that work with that course are thinking about the next term, you could bring some feedback to that group saying, hey, I polled my students, or I got feedback from my students, they suggested this. And so that kind of goes to the next slide, Al. Goes to kind of the more summative thing, and it happens typically at the end of the semester after the course is over, and the impacts are on the future versions of the course, not necessarily the current. Okay, so we've talked about self-assessment, we've talked about student assessment, now we're going to actually talk about peer review and what that means. So what is peer review? Simply it's using a team of your colleagues to give you some feedback. And there's some benefits to that. I mean, number one, your colleagues probably teach similar courses as you teach, and your colleagues have an understanding of the concepts that you're trying to teach. And so they have some unique characteristics that make them able to give you some good feedback. I could come watch you teach, and I could give you some general feedback about the pedagogy that you're using, but in terms of the content that you're teaching, I probably don't have enough expertise to give you specific critique about that. Well, that's an excellent point, Cheryl. And Cheryl's question or point is that when you have people that know you personally, it introduces bias, and it could go bias in both directions, good or bad. And so at the University of Florida, we have an official policy in place to where a peer review report is part of the teaching portfolio that goes in the dossier, at least it is now. And so there's a committee that is associated with your peer review that typically includes 2 or 3 people in your department, 1 person outside your department. And so that outside person, much like the outside person on the graduate committee, is supposed to then protect some of that bias in both directions. That's a good point.
But the other compounding factor, knowledge,
Well, yeah, and that's an excellent point, Alan. And in my role as director of the Teaching Resource Center, I get the opportunity, if you will, to serve on a lot of peer review committees, and I actually do enjoy it, and it does fit with my research and my teaching. So it's not one of those things that's outside of my core stuff that I do. But yeah, it's often it's like, oh, my packet is due in March. It's January. Will you come be on my peer review committee? That does create some pressures on there. And so one of the things I often ask, because we'll talk about the process in a minute, but typically you have a meeting at the beginning of that, and I'm typically pretty honest. I'm saying, all right, are we here just because you need this report to go in your dossier, or do you really want some good feedback on your teaching? And that kind of structures, it really structures some of the effort I put into it, because if they just want the report, I'll give them some feedback to put in the report. But if someone that has a sincere desire to get better at what they do, then because of they have that motivation, I'm more motivated to provide a deeper level of feedback to them. So next slide. So we're going to do an activity. Online, you guys got this in Sakai. And so this is for you to write on. So the top part is for if you are the person being observed. If the bottom part is if you are the person doing the observing. And then reservations for that, things that might make you hesitant to participate, and then the benefits of participating. So take a minute or two and jot down a few ideas in those boxes. Halfway through, we'll roll this into our break, and so take a couple minutes to work on that. If you need a quick restroom break or something, and so we will, in about 10 minutes, we'll reconvene to get some feedback on what you guys are working on there. we'll start with you guys, and so be thinking about benefits and reservations to the observed and the observer, and I'll get some feedback from you guys before we go to the group here on campus. Oh, so the study abroad that Amy and I are leading this spring to Trinidad, we were running into some roadblocks getting that approved for EEP because of the 5905 course number.
Okay.
And so I called and talked to the guy at the registrar's office. He said, change it over to a 5932 course number. And he said, we should be able to get it approved.
Okay.
So
Well, the 5905?
5905 is
Because independent study?
yeah. Well, it's 5905 is, yeah, and 5932 is a special topics.
Okay.
And he said, the 5905 code, when that comes up in the system, it's not typically thought of as a group learning activity, whereas it's 5932. So I've got Melissa's actually working on creating a section of 5932.
He's
Okay.
got the activity at the center.
Yep.
He doesn't have a
Okay, so let's come back together. Yeah, she was afraid. She didn't want to give her feedback. So I asked the folks online to provide some feedback, and Reza said, a benefit for being an observer, you may learn something new and be able to use it in your own teaching. That's an excellent example. And I learn something new every time that I go watch. Sometimes I get a better feel of a technique that someone's used. Sometimes, particularly if I'm observing in a class that's outside of my discipline, I actually learn a little bit about whatever the topic is that is being observed. And so I often get the opportunity to observe some larger classes, like 150, 200, large lecture types of classes. Personally, my courses are usually in the 20 student range. And so it's always interesting for me to watch some of those larger classes to see some things. So let's talk first about reservations about being observed. So what reservations, if you were the person that wanted to be observed, what might some of your reservations be about being observed? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, it's a little bit nerve-wracking. You've got all the students in your room that you're used to seeing, but all of a sudden you see someone that's not a student sitting in the back, and it's like, oh, wait a minute, I'm a little nervous today because they're in there watching. Excellent. What else, Cheryl? Yeah.
I guess because of being attacked by someone who's very structured in something that is a reservation.
Yeah, and so maybe it's like, I know that I'm doing this differently than so-and-so might have taught it, and if he or she's sitting in the back of the room, are they going to attack me or be very critical of the way I teach it just because it's different than the way they would teach it?
Will my students behave that day?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, will my students be on good behavior? And of course, when you're in a large lecture class, it's easy to sit in the back. I sit in the back, and the students that are right around me know I'm there, but most of the students don't know I'm there. I'm actually, this afternoon, I'm peer reviewing a class with 8 students. I cannot be in that room and them not know that I'm there because I'll be number 9 in that room. And so it's going to be very obvious that I'm in the room. Excellent. What about some benefits for being observed? Yeah, it's a good source of feedback. I might actually get to do a better job than I'm doing right now because someone's in there. Okay. What other benefits to being observed?
I can tell you the first time I was observed, put that kind of, I mean, I know I focused so hard, okay, I know people are coming, they're colleagues,
Yeah.
I lecture more, a lot better.
Yeah. And that is true. It's human nature to think when you know someone's coming to just that little bit of extra effort to do it. So,
That was the fun class I would ever have before I started. That'll be the classic. Everything.
yeah. Well, that's an honest observation. So what about reservations about being the observer? So if someone was to invite you to be an observer, what reservations might you have? Good. I'm looking at your boxes. You guys got stuff filled in. Let me close this door real quick. So reservations about being the observer. Yeah, I don't want to be that guy that just points out all the horrible stuff that you did. I want to do a good job, so it does take some effort. Good. Other reservations about being the observer?
I've done observations. Yeah, these are teachers. What am I going to bring?
Yeah, am I qualified to give feedback? Do I know enough to give feedback? Am I a good enough teacher to be able to give feedback? Good. That's an excellent. And so, I mean, I think I've shared with you guys the courses I teach are on how to teach. And so think about that for a second. So I spend all semester talking about how to be a good teacher. I place a lot of pressure on myself to actually modeling the things that I'm teaching my students how to do. So it's good. Being observer, you have to judge someone. It's not confidential feedback. That's an excellent point. And so it's like, this is not anonymous peer review. I mean, I'm there in the back. I'm judging you, and you know that I'm the one that's judging you. That can place a little bit of reservations, a little bit of burden on you. What about benefits of being the observer? Yep. Yeah, you think, hey, that's a pretty cool idea. I'm going to try to do that in my class.
Learn multiple.
Yeah, and so you can the only time that, let me back up. You can observe someone lots of different times. You don't have to be part of a peer review team to learn. In fact, one of the things, as I'm working with novice professors, one of the things I often encourage is, hey, someone in your department, someone in your program is going to be recognized as, man, that person's a good teacher. Ask that person if you can sit in and watch just to see how they do things. For most of you, the wealth of your teaching knowledge has come from watching your professors teach you. And that's a very narrow set of experiences related to that. And some of you might have had the opportunity to watch some excellent instructors. Some of you probably had the opportunity to watch some not so excellent instructors. And so it's always helpful to go watch good people. So how does this process work? Next slide, Al. You have to form the team. Again, we have a process here at UF that we use. Each department has a process, but you have to form the observation team. You have a pre-observation meeting where the team gets together to talk about the process and to talk about what will be observed. The more effective teams are the ones that, if the instructor has some specific things they would like to be observed. For example, maybe the instructor is trying to be more interactive in the classroom by questioning and discussion. So maybe that's what they want you to do. Maybe the person is interested in my dynamic in the way that I teach. Am I excited and enthusiastic? And so the better teams are the ones that in the pre-observation meeting identify some specific things to look at. Then you have the observation, and the observation typically involves all the team members going once or twice to watch the instructor teach. Sometimes it's on the same day, sometimes it's on different days, so forth. Then after the observation, the team gets back together and says, okay, here's what we saw, here are some suggestions that we have, here are some things you might consider, and then there's a write-up, kind of a summary, and say, here's what we observed, here are some suggestions that we would like for you to implement. Okay? Now, if we are approaching this whole process formatively, then this would happen over several semesters in a row, to where you're observed, you get some feedback, you come up with some action plans, then we would hope that the next semester, if we come to watch you again, that you've actually made some incremental progress towards that. If we provided some suggestions like, you know, hey, your PowerPoint presentations are way too complicated, you need to simplify them and remove some of the text. If that's one of our action plans, then we would hope the next time that we came that you would address that. So questions about this process?
The things that I think are moving towards the college level, some really flux between universities. Get away from class, being more formative. What suggestions give? What response back? Those are really perfect. Okay, everybody.
Right.
We've seen work. We just think about self-assessment. Your self-assessment, things you're doing, you're trying to.
Yeah, and it's really, if you think about improving your teaching, it's a holistic process. The peer review is one piece of feedback. Your feedback from your students is another piece of feedback. Your own personal observations are another piece of feedback. And if this process is working well, you're going to see things changing over time, and you're going to see teaching performance grow better over time. You know, it's no one expects that everyone's going to be an awesome teacher your very first semester. What we would expect is that you're better your second semester than you were your first, you're better your third semester than you were your second, better your fourth semester than you were your third, because you're making those incremental things as you do. Now, one of the challenges, particularly the very first time you teach a course, is chances are you were handed the syllabus from the guy that taught it before you did, which may or may not be the way you want it, but that's typically where you start from. You teach it once and you figure out, okay, this worked, this didn't work, and then you move on. The first semester that I was here at UF, I was hired late in the summer and actually had a teaching assignment that fall, and so I really didn't have a whole lot of prep time. So I pretty much took the syllabus from the person who had taught the course before me and said, okay, I wish I had time to change some things, but I don't, and so I'm going to work off of this syllabus. And it wasn't an absolute train wreck, but it was not good. And actually, I had some of the lowest course evaluations I've ever had that semester. But
4.5.
no, this was low. It was below. It was like 3.2 or something. It was significantly lower than my normal mean. Yeah, but anyway, but the key is if you had that 3.2 semester 1 and a 3.2 semester 2 and a 3.2 semester 3, someone's going to say, okay, wait a minute, something's not working here. And so, you know, and there are anomalies that happen in a given semester, and so you can't always project a perfect thing. And of course, once you start getting towards a perfect score, chances are you might regress towards the mean a little bit anyway, but it's always about improvement. Peer review? Yeah, and that's a little bit more complicated, and it depends on, too, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous. Typically, what would happen is that you would be added to the course, whether like in Sakai, you'd be added in Sakai. You would have the opportunity to review some of the materials, to look at some of the discussion boards. But yeah, it's a very different dynamic, particularly in an asynchronous environment. If it's synchronous, you can kind of be there and kind of mimic the process that would happen in a face-to-face class. But if it's asynchronous, it's a very different sort of thing. And we're struggling with that a little bit.
Yeah, but there are things, I mean, you could be, if you're holding chat sessions,
Mhm.
so if I'm observing in the chat. The other thing that struck me as I was looking at, the first time I started looking at course eval, of course, these are faculty who may have a lot of courses. So I started looking at it, responses on respect for or those are message on consistently.
Yep. Good. Let's see. Let's go to the next slide, and then we'll skip ahead some because I want to make sure we cover some stuff. And so, what can be assessed? The organization of the course and the subject matter, kind of the logistics sort of stuff. Is the syllabus work? Do the assignments make sense, and so forth? Effective communication, and that can be online or face-to-face. The knowledge and enthusiasm for the subject matter. Is the instructor appear like they know what they're talking about and want to be there? Positive attitudes towards students, fairness in assessment and grading, flexibility, and appropriate student learning outcomes. And there are other things as well, but there's a variety of things that we can observe. Let's see. I do want to acknowledge that much of this material I borrowed from Dr. Kirby Barrick. You guys remember Kirby was in here 3-4 weeks ago. And so Kirby is kind of one of our gurus on peer review of teaching. And so it kind of goes to that, be smarter, work smarter and not harder. And if someone's already got good materials, borrow some of their good materials. So I do want to acknowledge him. So let's go back to the objectives. So sources of feedback, we talked about you being a source of feedback, your students being a source of feedback, and your peers being a source of feedback. We talked about some benefits and some reservations for being the observed and the observer. And then we talked about the process. You assemble the team, have a pre-observation meeting, you're observed, you have a post-observation meeting, and then you come up with an action plan. And that can be built on semester after semester after semester. So comments or questions related to peer review of teaching? Okay, so we're going to jump ahead to scholarship. Let me make sure no one's online. Okay, jump ahead to scholarship at teaching and learning, and you guys have this full presentation online. I don't know that I'm not going to be able to go into quite as much detail as I would like to because of time constraints. But so we're going to discuss what is a scholarship at teaching and learning. We're going to differentiate between some different terminology. We're going to talk about the process, and then we're going to briefly talk about some outputs for what you do. We'll skip over, okay, let's keep going, skip over that one now. So a few concepts, because the term scholarship at teaching and learning is thrown around in a lot of different ways, and it's not used consistently. Like if you just did a Google search for a scholarship at teaching and learning, you would see different things that came about. So I choose to use these terms in this way. Excellent teaching. Excellent teachers are people that have just through trial and error have refined their process over time. They are good at what they do because they figured out what works for them. They may not know the appropriate educational terminology or things like that. They just have gotten good at what they do. So that's excellent teaching. The next level is scholarly teaching. Scholarly teachers are the ones that start diving into the literature to learn about what is it that we know about learning theory? What is it that we know about good teaching? And they are then using that literature to enhance their own teaching. Then the third, and I would say the more complicated and most in-depth, is scholarship at teaching and learning. This is where you're doing both of those, but you're also evaluating your own teaching and contributing to the literature. So you're not just a consumer of the literature, you're a contributor towards the literature. And we talked earlier about your teaching program and combining all those things together. If you're going to invest a considerable amount of effort into your teaching, scholarship at teaching and learning is a way to get some tangible outcomes in the scholarly literature related to your teaching. And so why do we do this? Well, we talk about it in a couple of things. Number one, content knowledge. You guys have PhDs in content knowledge, whatever that discipline is. Food science, soil science, botany, whatever. You have a lot of content knowledge, okay? You got a PhD in content knowledge. Then there's pedagogical knowledge, general understanding of how people learn. Educational psychology, that sort of stuff. Now, what makes your specific situation unique and what makes the work that you do worthy of contributing to the literature is pedagogical content knowledge. And so it's about how do I teach a specific concept in my discipline? How do I teach macroeconomic theory? How do I teach photosynthesis? How do I teach insert a concept there? And so this is the part that's unique to your discipline and the part that can be contributed to the literature, oftentimes that's lacking in the literature, pedagogical content knowledge. And so aside from me, from Grady saying this is important, why else do we say it's important? Well, the National Research Council put out this publication, and it's available free online in a PDF format. And it's targeted primarily towards undergraduate level instruction, but it's applicable to graduate level instruction. They said, hey, wait a minute, we need to do some things differently to make sure our students are better prepared to go out and do the things that they want to do. And so they talked about things like transferable skills, undergraduate research, outreach and extension, internships, international perspectives. They kind of said, okay, here's the green light, guys. Go be creative in the things that you do and assess what you did. And so if you're interviewing for a job or you're talking with a department chair and they're saying, well, why do you want to do that? You can say, well, the National Research Council says we need to be innovative and creative in the way that we're teaching, and we need to document the things that we're doing in a way that can be transferable to other situations. So, scholarship and teaching and learning process. Can you guys read that? Tell me if that looks similar to anything else you've seen before. Yeah, it's a scientific process, isn't it? So the scholarship and teaching and learning is about using your skills as a researcher to do some research related to your teaching. Now, going back to a conversation we had earlier today, is most of you guys, your skill set related to doing social science research is probably kind of narrow. And so you probably don't have a complete set of skills that you're going to need to do that. And so that might involve you learning some more skills on your own, or partnering with people like me and other social scientists that have that skill set that you would need to do. Now, for most of you guys, the benchmark for high quality research are what? Controlled experimental designs? Something like that. And that doesn't happen very often in this kind of research. This kind of research is often convenient samples of your students. They're not random assigned to things. And so there are limitations in what we can do. And so when I consult with people as they're talking about doing these kind of projects, one of the hardest things for them to overcome is that, you know, I can't do randomized block designs and do all these creative things that I do in my own research because I don't have that many students to deal with, and I can't manipulate them the way that I can, you know, plants in the greenhouse or something. So there are some limitations, and this might cause some of you to quiver a little bit. We use qualitative methodologies, so we don't necessarily use just numbers to summarize data. We do focus groups, and we talk to people, and we see what their opinions are, and we summarize things like that. Again, those are valuable tools that you guys probably are not that comfortable with, but there will be people on your campuses that can do it. Now, here's the other cool thing. There are people like me that do this kind of research. And there are people like me that are looking for opportunities to get at other sets of students that I may not already have access to. And so if you're doing something very creative with your class, chances are there might be someone like me that says, hey, I'm interested in researching that. I would love to partner with you on that. Or if you want to go after, we'll talk about some grant opportunities in a minute. If you want to go after some grant funding to do some creative things, there are people that are interested in doing those things. So, but here's the last piece right here, is that you're not doing this just for the sake of doing research, that ultimately you're going to use what you did to improve your own teaching. Now, most professors, at least my experience has been, most professors are pretty inquisitive people, and they're naturally interested in collecting data related to their teaching. And so this is not necessarily a big stretch for most folks to do, except most folks stop right here. They don't do this piece. So the scholarship in teaching and learning is really, this is the key piece right here. It's about taking what you've learned, writing it up in a way that can be presented as a presentation at a conference, as a poster, as a journal article, something like that, so that others can learn about what you did. And so you might be thinking, well, I teach a genetics class. I've got 25 students in there. What impact is what I'm doing? You know, is that really worth sharing with anyone? Well, if you're doing something very creative and you're showing that it has an impact on your students' learning, then it could very well be applicable for people that are teaching similar courses to what you're teaching. And so yes, it is worthwhile sharing. Many professional societies have a section or division focused strictly on teaching aspects of that discipline. And so, you know, most professions, most disciplines, most associations have that already built in to be able to do that. Okay, next slide, Al. So, where might you submit this stuff? Well, this is an incomplete list of journals. I just started searching all sorts of things that I can find. Journal of Ag Education, NACTA Journal, International Ag and Extension Agency, Natural Resources, Journal of Food Science Education, Nutrition Education, Health, Applied Environmental Education, Physiology, American Biology Teacher, Cell Biology Education, Biological Education, Family and Consumer Sciences, College Science Teaching. So there are a lot of different ways and a lot of different journals that are out there. Now, much like your own discipline, where there are like the premier journals, then there are the good journals, then there are the, if you make complete sentences, you can get something accepted. There are different levels of these types of journals as well. Now, the people that do hardcore educational research, like the folks that work in educational psychology, the stuff that we would do in scholarship teaching and learning is probably not going to be appropriate for those journals. But the journals related to your disciplinary education, to general teaching and learning sorts of things, to college teaching, those are certainly appropriate. And there are conferences devoted strictly to scholarship in teaching and learning, college teaching, and so forth. So what about funding? Again, this is an incomplete list of some of the funding programs that I came across that might be appropriate. We've actually had really good luck for USDA in the Higher Ed Challenge Grant Program. It's all about doing creative, innovative things in your teaching. Multicultural scholars, international science and education, women and minorities in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields. NSF has a whole series of education-related projects as well. So there is funding out there to do some of these things. The two Higher Ed Challenge grants that we had, one is wrapped up, the second one we're in our last year on. First one was $460,000 over 3 years. The second one was $700,000 over 3 years. So it's not pocket change either. There's real money out there to do some real things with there. The Multicultural Scholars Program and then the Graduate Research Fellowship Program, those are funding programs to create educational programs to bring graduate students into your program. So I mean, again, it's real money out there to do some of these things on there. So I went through that a little bit quicker than I had wanted to for the essence of time. So what questions do you have related to the scholarship of teaching and learning? Excellent question. And so some of these journals have different kinds of articles that could be in. Some of the articles are just an opportunity to share a creative approach. So maybe you came up with this very cool activity that you use in one of your classes. So you could write that up almost as an information piece about sharing. And so that is one level. But then there are other articles that are truly research articles where you propose some research questions, designed an appropriate protocol, collected data, analyzed that data, and then presented it. And so those are often, the research ones are often peer reviewed. The sharing creative ideas are often maybe editor reviewed, where the editor looked at those. But that's a good point. So there are different ways of sharing information. A couple of the conferences associations I belong to and the conferences that I go to often use the poster process as a way of sharing creative ideas, where people, submit an abstract about a creative idea they have, and then they create a poster to display that, and then at the conference are able to share about what they did.
Sometimes don't underestimate the value of partnering.
Mm-hmm.
So a friend of mine from Texas saying, well, let's go after our big journal. Traditionally, we actually got one published, multi-university, UF, and metrics. We get that publishing.
You had a
Yeah, and part of it is doing some homework to figure out, based on the type of work that you want to do and the type of research that you want to do, what is an appropriate journal that might be applicable, and then looking at the types of research in that journal, looking at the way they've structured their articles, looking at the way they've reported their findings, and that makes it a little bit more, and then even referencing previous research from that journal are all things that help ultimately get things accepted. What other questions? So thinking back to where we started from today, developing your teaching program. So the scholarship at Teaching and Learning might be one piece of your teaching program where you are generating some scholarship out of your program. Maybe you're involving your graduate students in those scholarship at Teaching and Learning things. Maybe you're involving other colleagues in there. Maybe you're partnering with folks at other universities or in other departments related to that. And it's a way of again, another piece of what might be in a teaching program. Now, if you are hired on a heavy research appointment to do some sort of biology research, and you turn in your dossier and it's only scholarship at Teaching and Learning research, that's probably not a recipe for success. But if you're hired on a research appointment and you've got that biology research, and oh, by the way, you've got scholarship at Teaching and Learning research on top of that, it's like, that's value added. It's a way of increasing the exponential part of what you're doing. Because again, you're probably already going to be creative in your teaching. You're probably already going to be collecting some data to inform yourself as to how well things are going. And so scholarship at Teaching and Learning is taking it that one step forward is, okay, let's take this data, let's write it up, let's submit it somewhere. And so then it becomes another line on your vita as a presentation or an article or something as well that actually enhances your teaching program.
I can't believe it. The other reality of tennis show distinct areas. So the things we're talking about, if you have showing some scholarship.
Yeah, because particularly if you talk about impact and you start talking about those longer term impacts, if you can go through there and start showing where other people are referencing your scholarship at Teaching and Learning work, or that other people have implemented the things that you shared in your article, then it's a way of showing bigger impacts in what you do. That sounds like a scholarship at Teaching and Learning question to me.
Yeah, there's a couple points there. So one is creativity. Creative works is a line item packet.
Yeah.
Perhaps scholarship around
Yeah.
it impacts.
Yeah, and so each university will have a slightly different format for their promotion tenure dossiers. For us, we do have a section for creative work. So if we created some apps or created some modules or created some things, we can let those show up in that creative works. And that is one step of it. But then if you do that next step, collect some data, get it accepted somewhere for publication, that's the next step too. And so again, it's value added to what you do. But yeah, I mean, those sorts of things are right up this line about, hey, I want, and it typically starts out your personal experiences. I wonder in my class, if I did this, what would happen? Then you do it and you assess what happened, and then you report that. So it's good stuff. What other questions do you have? Okay, so we started out today talking about a teaching program, and I tried to stretch you a little bit to think about, hey, it's not just teaching this class, it's about this suite of activities that I might do in my teaching program. And we talked about maybe using a logic model to kind of develop a program. It might be a little bit more comprehensive and a little bit bigger than what you'd initially thought of. Then we talked specifically about the peer review process and how both being a person being observed and also being the person doing the observing might be a beneficial activity and could also be part of that teaching program. And then we finish up today talking about a scholarship in teaching and learning and how that's an opportunity to do some value added to some of the things that you're probably already doing. And again, that could be another piece of a teaching program. And I want to draw you back to Mike Kane that was in here about a month ago. And Mike is probably the poster child of how to do this integration sort of stuff to where it just all blends together. Not only all aspects of his teaching program, but his research program also blends in there to where I bet you, I don't know if Mike has anything like a logic model created, but I bet you Mike wouldn't have 2 or 3 logic models. He'd have one logic model, and his teaching and research and everything would be embedded on one single logic model. Uh-huh.
Idea. He has to do this for himself too. I don't know, like this.
Mhm.
I wanna.
It is, and I have not used this example. I've not used a logic model specifically for a teaching program with my students, but I have used it with them to develop a research program, and I have used it specifically on a single grant application with them. But now that I'm thinking about it, it might be good to practice what I preach and get them to work this through.
Logic model class.
Yeah. Yeah. But again, just other things to think about. So a couple of logistical things to think about. So your teaching philosophy statements are due today in Sakai. And so if you've not, you should have gotten your peer feedback and hopefully maybe gotten some good peer feedback and maybe made some tweaks to your teaching philosophy. So if you will get that final version turned back in, and then we will take a look at that and also give you some additional feedback. And hopefully it'll refine. Again, your teaching philosophy, the core pieces of your philosophy statement are probably going to stay consistent, but your teaching philosophy will probably evolve a little bit over time, particularly as you gain different sets of experiences. So get that turned in so we can get that, that feedback to you as quick as possible. Then next Wednesday is our last regular scheduled session. And Dr. Elaine Turner is going to be back in, and Elaine's going to talk to about advising and mentoring students. And it'll also be our graduation ceremony, and so no caps and gowns needed, but it'll be our graduation ceremony. Then the week after, it's an optional activity, but if you want to prepare a seminar and then deliver that seminar, we are willing to watch you and give you some feedback, kind of, I guess, peer review you, I guess, if you will. But we do need to know in pretty short notice about how many of you are interested in doing that so that we can figure out, do we have enough time to do them all in this room on the 20th, or do we need multiple rooms and that sort of stuff. And so Natalie will be coordinating that. And so if you want to deliver a short seminar and get some feedback on that, then you can certainly do that. And you might think about this in terms of oftentimes if you're interviewing for a job, you might be asked to deliver a seminar. You can think about this in that way, and we can give you some feedback on that. So Natalie, what else? Anything? Uh-huh. I'm thinking, well, it'll depend a little bit on how many people, we're not going to hold you to this, but how many people in here right now might be interested in that? Okay, so I'm thinking 20, 25 minutes maybe, something like that.
What would be the
And it can be almost what you want it to be. Sometimes it might be where you're asked to deliver. Think about this like as practice for the interview process. And so, what sorts of seminars are typically associated with the interview process for you? So, you might choose to deliver a seminar outlining a research program, or maybe you deliver a seminar outlining a teaching program, or something. But it's just an opportunity for you to get it. You guys have been in the back of the room. This is an opportunity for you to be in the front of the room, to actually do some of the things.
could be as simple as sending we'll come interview for our department and put in the classroom. Usually you're told, okay, class and part of the must not
Huh? Yeah. It could be, yeah, it could be. And so we'll give you a lot of latitude in what you choose to do. And if, chances are you might be asked to deliver an hour-long seminar wherever you go. For logistical reasons, we probably don't have enough time to let everyone do an hour-long session, but we'll make some accommodations as we can. So maybe just be delivering a piece of what you might do in a longer one. And this invitation goes to our folks online as well, and we'll have to figure out technology-wise how we might make that happen. But if that's something you guys are interested in, we can work on that as well.
with the audience. Expect them good skills are
Yep. And if you choose to participate in this activity, and again, you're not obligated to, but if you choose to participate in this activity, we want it to be relevant to you. And so, we're not, aside from the time limitations, we're not placing a lot of barriers and boundaries around what it is, because we want you to do something that will actually be of use to you. And so you can think about it that way.
maybe you're working on some labs
Yeah.
or at some conference.
Yep. Okay. Other questions? All right, so thank you so much, and we will see you next Wednesday for graduation. We'll have to find that music. I don't know, I can't even hum it, yeah. The procession music that you play during graduation. All right, guys, we'll see you next week.